Hi guys, I hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to my channel and another video, where today I'm going to be trying out a few of Roman Szmal's watercolours for the first time and filling up the spaces in the granulating watercolours palette I showed you in my last video. I'll be going through which colours I bought, swatching them out and rearranging my final choice of colours to come up with a palette that will work for me and the subjects I like to paint. So I hope you enjoy the video. All the supplies I'm using today will be listed in the description box below, along with the links to where you can get them on Jackson's Art Supplies website. I now have affiliate links, which means that if you purchase anything through them, I will receive a small commission at no extra cost to you. You will also receive 10% off your order if you set up your account with Jackson's when you make your purchases, so thank you in advance for your support. Now with all that said, let's get and unwrap these paints. It was really hard to choose which granulating paints to buy to complete my palette, especially after receiving so many great suggestions from my last video, so thank you so much if you took the time to comment. I have made a note of all those colours for future reference, but I decided to go with Roman Szmal watercolours this time because they seem to be really reasonably priced and I've been curious about them for a while now, so I'm excited to be swatching them out today. They are a Polish brand formulated with linden honey and hand poured into full pans that are available open stock and range in price on Jackson's from £2.90 to £5.10 each. The colours I went with are ones you guys recommended, as well as some others that were either granulating or just looked interesting and different to what I already have. I also bought this little colour chart. It was just 10p, which I thought would be a useful reference to have in the future. I did go a bit overboard with the ordering, as I really only have room in my palette for 6 half pans or 3 of these full pans. And if you're really observant, you'll notice that I also got 2 duplicates by mistake. But that's okay, as I'm already thinking of other palettes I can create with the colours I don't use in this palette. I'm also thinking of switching out some of the existing half pans to give a more balanced palette overall, as it's quite heavy on the greens at the moment. More on that a bit later on. First I need to unwrap the pans and swatch them out. I really love how these watercolours are packaged, and I think I'm right in saying that the paper sleeve here is hand painted, so you can accurately see the colour of the paint inside. All of the pigment information is also printed on here. As I mentioned before, these paints are formulated with honey, so with the extremely warm weather we were experiencing at the time I filmed this video, a couple of the pans were a bit sticky. But each pan has a piece of glassine type paper over the top to protect it, so it wasn't really a problem. It might be something to consider if you live in a warmer climate or if you wanted to travel with these paints, but it's not something we would normally have to worry about here in the UK. The pans themselves don't come labelled with which colour they are, so to avoid losing track of what's what, I use my skinny washi tape to annotate each pan as I went along. You can just write directly on the pans themselves with a permanent marker, but I find it a bit fiddly and tend to smudge the ink before it's dry, so I thought I'd try this for a change. With that done, it's time to activate the dried paints with a spritz of water and get to swatching. You can see the importance of labelling each pan here, as the concentrated pigments can all look very similar. The plastic tray I'm using, by the way, is just an old food tray I rescued from the recycling, and is just there to protect my desk from water and paint. So first up is Natural Sienna Light, which I bought as I felt a yellow was missing from my palette. This one is classified as having medium granulation, although on swatching it out, I didn't personally think there was much, if any, granulation at all. But that said, I have found granulating yellows pretty hard to find, and I'm yet to come up with a good way to mix my own. Next is Transparent Oxide Yellow pigment PY42, which, although obviously darker than the Sienna Light, granulates beautifully and I really like it. The last of these more yellowy colours is one of Roman Szmal's newer earth pigments called goethite. This is again a beautiful pigment, though it does remind me a bit of the super granulation tundra orange that I already have in my palette. So it'll be interesting to see how they compare once the swatches are dry. Next is benzimidazole orange containing pigment P036. This is another medium granulating pigment and one I bought just because I love the look of it and because I like to mix oranges with blues and browns in my animal paintings. This is a wonderfully rich, super pigmented colour, but again I wouldn't describe it as being particularly granulating. Moving on, and we have Perylene Maroon, pigment PR179, which I chose as I don't yet have a red in my palette. Like the orange, it is described as having medium granulation, but with this one I feel the granulation is a bit more obvious. Next we have Caput Mortuum, pigment PR102. This is another earth pigment and is one of the colours I bought because I've never tried it before. I'm really excited by it though, as it has a really interesting granulation which I think will help to add a lot of depth and texture to any painting where you want those dark reddy browns. Another colour I've not seen or had before is Ultramarine Pink, pigment PR259. This is a really pretty colour that leans more towards blue than the Potter's Pink I currently have in my palette. It does granulate nicely though, and it would be interesting to see how it mixes with other granulating colours. I had quite a few people suggest the next two pigments, the first of which is Mineral Violet. This is a combination of two pigments, PB29 and PV19. And wow, this one really packs a punch. It's stunning and reveals violets, blues and pinks as it separates and dries. It's also transparent. The next recommendation was for Shadow Violet, which contains the same PB29 and PV19 as the Mineral Violet, but it also has a third pigment added, PG50. This is described as being granulating and semi-transparent, and it is beautiful, but I felt like it was more of a semi-opaque than a semi-transparent pigment, so I might need to experiment a bit more on that one. If that's one of the colours you've tried, please let me know your thoughts on its transparency or opacity and leave me a comment in the box below. Next we have Shea-Beige Grey. I think that's how you pronounce it, but my apologies if not. This is another colour that reminded me very much of Daniel Smith's Moonglow, as it contains two of the same pigments, PB29 and PR177. The third pigment, instead of Moonglow's PG18, is PG26. It granulates really nicely and is semi-transparent, and interestingly, despite containing the fugitive PR177 pigment, still claims to have a really high light-fast rating. So that's something that I'll have to test out for myself. I do really like it though. This next colour is another one that was recommended. Misty Morning is one of Roman Szmal's newer colours, and I think is quite aptly named. It is a granulating two-pigment mix of PG50 and PV19, so the same pigments as Shadow Violet without the ultramarine blue. This is a really unique colour that I can really see getting a lot of use out of. I'm also curious to see what colour I would get if I mixed in some ultramarine blue from my own palette. To round off my colour choices, I've now got a couple of blues and a green. Indanthrone Blue PB60 is not a granulating colour, but is another watercolour I've not tried before, and just look at how gorgeous it is. I will definitely find a good home for this one, even if it's not in my granulating watercolours palette. The second blue is more of a turquoise, Ocean Blue is a 2-pigment mix of PBR24 and PB15:3. It's medium granulating and semi-transparent, and would be perfect for painting water or seascapes. The last colour I have is one that was suggested by quite a few people, and even though my palette currently has more than its fair share of greens, I couldn't ignore this one. Aquarius green is a granulating green comprised of 3 pigments, PY150, PBR25 and PB29, and I'm glad I went ahead and got it, as with the yellow pigment in there it feels a lot fresher and brighter than any of the super granulating greens in my palette at the moment. So I think this calls for a bit of a rethink. And that's the beauty of customising your own watercolour palette. You can change it up whenever you like. Now the swatches are all dry and I have added pigment information to this swatch sheet, I can decide what I want to do. To help me with this, I also need to take a look at how my palette looks before making any changes. The first thing I need to sort out are the greens. If I was a landscape artist, I might want to keep all of these, but I'm not, and being that I want to include the new Aquarius green, I need to swap out at least 2 green half pans. So for me, the 2 obvious ones to go are the 2 opaque greens, Tundra Green and Forest Green. For the blues, I've already got quite a few of those too, and I'm really happy with the granulating ones I've got, so no changes there for now. For an earthy yellow, I'm thinking not the natural sienna light as it's not granulating, and as much as I like it, not the goethite either, as it's too similar to Tundra Orange as I'd thought. That leaves transparent oxide yellow, PY42, which I think will fit in well. As far as the orange and the Perylene Maroon go, I love them both, but I don't think they are granulating enough to fit in a granulating watercolours palette. They would, however, be right at home in an autumn palette, maybe later on in the year. So far as the Shadow Violet, the Grey and the Misty Mountain go, I've only really got room for 2, as I've already got Tundra Violet in my palette which I definitely want to keep. I think the Misty Mountain is really unusual, so I'm going to include that. And even though there is a potential issue with the light fastness of the Grey, I think I get more use out of it in my paintings. So I'll take Moonglow out and set up my own light fast test to include Moonglow, the Shaybush Grey and the Shadow Violet as well. And depending on the results, I can swap in the most light fast of the 3, and I'll let you know how I get on. I've only got room for 1 more full pan, so as much as I love the ultramarine pink and the beautiful mineral violet, I know I'll likely get most use out of the Caput Mortuum, so that's the one I'm going to choose. Failing this, I'll just have to get a bigger palette. So I've marked out the new Roman Szmal watercolours I want to add to my palette, which sadly means leaving the beautiful pinks, blues and violets out. But wouldn't they make a gorgeous galaxy palette? Anyway, after taking 3 half pans out, adding 5 full pans in and doing a bit of reorganising, I still had room for 1 half pan. This I decided to fill with Cobalt Violet Hue, PV62. This is a granulating Schminke watercolour I already had in my drawer, and I think it finishes off this palette nicely. All that's left to do now is to redo the swatch card for the inside of the tin. I've deliberately arranged the pans to keep the Schminke super granulating colours together, and fitted everything else around them to make the palette as user-friendly as possible. So I'm just going to let you watch this, and then I'll come back at the end with a few last words. So here it is, the finished swatch card for my finished granulating watercolours palette, and I'm really pleased with it. Compared to how it was at the end of my last video, I think it's now got a better range of colours with a huge potential for mixing even more. Setting up this palette has really opened my eyes to the world of granulating paints, and no doubt at some stage I will have to expand into a bigger palette. For now though, this is more than enough to be getting on with, and I'm excited to see what I can create. I've really enjoyed swatching Roman Szmal's watercolours and can't wait to try them out in a painting. So if that's something you'd like to see, and if you've liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you're visiting my channel for the first time. And hit the notification bell if you'd like to get notified as soon as I upload a new video. Thank you so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!